My 7-year-old adopted granddaughter was left alone in a dark house while my son and his wife drank champagne on a $50,000 cruise with their biological child. When she called me at 3 in the morning, choking on her tears and asking why they did not want her, I did not just get mad. I got even. Within 15 hours, I completely destroyed their perfect vacation, stripped them of everything they owned, and made sure they would never hurt that little girl again. If you have ever had to stand up to family who used you, hit subscribe and let me know what city you are watching from in the comments below. But first, let me tell you exactly how a single phone call turned a retired father into a nightmare. The phone rang at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. When you are 72 years old, a phone call at that hour never brings good news. You expect it to be a hospital or the police. You never expect it to be a terrified child. I reached over to the nightstand, my hand shaking, just a little, and answered. For a second, all I heard was a heavy thumping bass, the kind of loud, obnoxious music that rattles the windows. Then a tiny, trembling voice whispered through the speaker. "Grandpa." It was Maya. She was whispering so quietly, I had to press the phone hard against my ear. "Maya, sweetheart." "Where are you?" I asked, throwing the blankets off and sitting up. "I am in the closet," she sobbed, her breath catching in her throat. "There are people out there. They are screaming. They are breaking things. Grandpa, please come get me. Why did Mommy and Daddy leave me here?" The blood in my veins turned to absolute ice. My son Derek and his wife Brittany were supposed to be on a family vacation. They had been talking about this Royal Caribbean luxury cruise for months. They told me they were taking both kids. They told me it was a bonding trip. Yet here was my 7-year-old adopted granddaughter, hiding in a dark closet in the middle of the night, surrounded by strangers. "Stay on the phone with me, Maya," I told her. My voice dropping into that calm, flat tone I used to use back on the construction sites when things went terribly wrong. "Do not make a sound. Do not come out of that closet. Grandpa is coming right now." I did not bother changing my clothes. I threw a heavy denim jacket over my undershirt, shoved my feet into my work boots, and grabbed my keys. Then I opened the heavy iron safe in my closet and took out my Colt M1911. I am an old-school Texas man. When a little girl calls me crying because strangers are tearing up her house, I do not wait for the police to arrive and fill out paperwork. I handle my family business myself. I stepped out into the freezing night air and climbed into my Ford F-150. The engine roared to life, breaking the dead silence of my property. I threw it into gear and tore down the long driveway, heading straight for the Dallas suburbs. The drive usually takes 30 minutes. I made it in 15. The whole way there, my mind was racing, trying to make sense of the absolute madness happening in my own family. I spent 40 years of my life building a construction empire from the dirt up. I broke my back working 80-hour weeks, so my son Derek would never have to know what it felt like to go to bed hungry. When I retired, I handed him the keys to the kingdom. I made him the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I even bought him the house he lives in. It is a sprawling $1.2 million estate in one of the safest neighborhoods in the state. I bought it because I wanted my grandchildren to have a massive backyard, a safe neighborhood, and a beautiful place to grow up. I paid for that house in cash. It is legally owned by my company. I gave Derek everything. And how does he repay me? By abandoning his adopted daughter while he takes his biological son on a luxury vacation. By leaving a 7-year-old little girl in the care of whoever was currently tearing up the house I bought with my own blood, sweat, and tears. As I sped down the empty highway, the tires gripping the cold asphalt, the anger in my chest burned hotter than it ever had in my entire life. I remembered the day they adopted Maya. They paraded her around like a trophy. They used her to look like the perfect, progressive, loving family. But behind closed doors, I saw the subtle looks of disgust Brittany gave the poor girl. I saw how Derek always bought expensive toys for his son Hunter, but told Maya she had to share. I always tried to compensate by spoiling Maya myself, but I never imagined their cruelty would reach a level like this. Leaving her behind, lying to me about it, letting a bunch of animals terrorize her in the middle of the night. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The truck engine growled as I pushed the speed dial past 90. Through the phone sitting on my passenger seat, I could still hear the muffled sounds of chaos. Glass shattering, people shouting, Maya crying softly into her knees. Every sob from that little girl felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "I am almost there, sweetheart," I said, keeping my eyes glued to the dark road ahead. "Just hold on a little longer." I turned onto their upscale street, expecting peace and quiet. Instead, I found a nightmare. I slammed the brakes, skidding to a halt right in front of the house. The pristine, manicured lawn I had paid landscapers to maintain was completely destroyed. There were at least 6 beat-up cars parked on the grass, tearing up the mud. The front door was wide open, and the thumping bass of the music was so loud it vibrated the windows of my truck. Red plastic cups were littered across the driveway. 2 teenagers I had never seen in my life were stumbling around near the porch, laughing loudly. This was not a family home anymore. It was a frat house, and my little girl was trapped inside. I turned off the truck engine. I picked up my phone and told Maya I was outside, then ended the call. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up my Colt M1911. I checked the chamber. It was fully loaded. The cold metal felt heavy and familiar in my hand. I stepped out of the truck and let the door slam shut behind me. I did not care who these people were. I did not care how they got into the house. I only cared about getting my granddaughter out of that closet. I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching over plastic cups and broken glass. The 2 teenagers on the porch froze when they saw me coming out of the shadows. They looked at the heavy coat, the anger on my face, and the gun resting at my side. They did not say a word. They just backed away slowly. I stepped onto the front porch, took a deep breath, and prepared to show whoever was inside exactly what happens when you cross Richard Caldwell. I stood on the front porch for a brief moment, letting the freezing Texas wind whip against my face while I listened to the utter chaos unfolding inside the home I had purchased. The heavy bass thumped against the solid wood of the front door, vibrating through the soles of my leather work boots. My son had promised me this house would be a quiet, safe sanctuary for his family. He had looked me right in the eyes and sworn he understood the immense responsibility of raising 2 young children. Clearly, his promises meant absolutely nothing. I gripped the cold steel handle of my Colt pistol, making sure my finger rested safely off the trigger, but keeping the weapon ready at my side. I did not bother knocking or ringing the doorbell. Nobody would have heard it anyway over the deafening music. I raised my heavy work boot and drove it right into the area next to the deadbolt with every ounce of strength I had left in my old bones. The thick mahogany wood splintered with a deafening crack, and the heavy door slammed open, bouncing violently off the interior wall. The thumping bass of the music hit me like a physical wave, but it was the smell that truly made my stomach turn. Stale beer, cheap marijuana, and vomit filled the air. The living room I had helped them paint 2 years ago was completely trashed. Beer cans were crushed into the expensive Persian rug. A large crystal lamp was knocked over and shattered into 1,000 pieces. And there, sprawled across the custom leather sofa, was the babysitter. She looked no older than 18, wearing clothes that belonged in a cheap nightclub, and she was completely passed out. A half-empty bottle of liquor was sitting on the hardwood floor right next to her dangling hand. Around her, about 6 teenagers were frozen in absolute shock, staring wide-eyed at the old man who had just kicked down the front door, holding a loaded pistol. I racked the slide of my Colt. The sharp metallic clack cut right through the heavy bass of the stereo system. "Get out!" I roared. My voice echoed through the destroyed living room, carrying decades of command from noisy construction sites. The teenagers scrambled like cockroaches when the lights suddenly turn on in a dirty kitchen. One of them bumped into the stereo, knocking the music offline, leaving only the sound of their frantic footsteps and the heavy thud of my boots on the hardwood floor. I did not care that it was freezing cold outside. I did not care how they got home or where they went. "Move," I yelled again, pointing the barrel of my gun toward the broken front door. They tripped over themselves, running out into the cold night, leaving the passed-out babysitter behind on the ruined couch. I walked over to her, grabbed a decorative throw pillow, and tossed it hard against her face. She groaned, her eyes fluttering open, bloodshot, and entirely confused. She tried to mumble something, but I immediately cut her off. "If you are not out of my house in exactly 10 seconds, I will have the police drag you out in handcuffs," I told her, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She took one terrified look at my face, stumbled to her feet, and ran out without even grabbing her jacket or her purse. With the house finally clear and eerily quiet, I put the safety back on my gun and tucked it securely into my waistband. I hurried down the dark hallway toward the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and walked straight to the large walk-in closet. "Maya," I called out softly, trying my best not to scare her any further. "It is Grandpa. I am here now." The closet was pitch black, but I could hear a soft rustling sound coming from behind a row of heavy winter coats. I reached blindly for the light switch on the wall and flicked it upward, flooding the large enclosed space with bright overhead lighting. The sudden glare made me squint, but it revealed exactly what I had been desperately searching for. I knelt down on the plush carpet and gently pulled the coats aside. There she was, my beautiful, sweet 7-year-old granddaughter, curled up in a tiny ball in the darkest corner of the closet. She was wearing thin cotton pajamas featuring cartoon princesses, completely inappropriate for a freezing winter night, with a broken front door letting the icy draft blow through the hallway. She looked up at me, her large brown eyes red and horribly swollen from crying. She was trembling violently, her small hands clutching her knees tight against her chest, as if she was trying to make herself invisible. I did not say another word. I just reached out and pulled her into my arms. She buried her face in my shoulder and let out a heartbreaking sob, her little fingers digging into the fabric of my shirt. "It is okay," I whispered, gently rubbing her back. "Grandpa has got you. Nobody is going to hurt you ever again." I stood up, lifting her easily. She felt entirely too light for a girl her age. I took off my heavy denim jacket and carefully wrapped it around her small shoulders to keep her warm against the biting draft. "Let us get out of this horrible place," I said, carrying her out of the ruined bedroom and back down the quiet hallway. We reached the pristine kitchen, and I set her down gently on one of the expensive bar stools so I could grab her a bottle of water from the stainless steel refrigerator. That was when I saw it. Sitting right in the middle of the spotless quartz kitchen counter was a bright yellow sticky note. It was hastily written in Brittany's familiar looping, pretentious handwriting. I picked up the square piece of paper, my thick fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the cold counter. The words were written in dark blue ink, perfectly spaced and unapologetically cruel. It read, "Milk is in the fridge. Do not call us unless someone is literally dying. We are boarding our ship in Miami. Enjoy your weekend." There was no emergency contact number. There was no mention of Maya's bedtime, her allergies, or her favorite bedtime story. There was just a cold, heartless directive to leave them alone while they sailed away on a luxury ocean liner. I read the note 3 times, hoping my tired old eyes were playing tricks on me, hoping I had misunderstood the context. But the reality of their pure selfishness was staring me right in the face. My chest tightened as a horrifying thought suddenly struck me. I looked around the empty kitchen and realized I had only found one child in this massive house. Where was my grandson? Where was Hunter? I left the sticky note on the counter and walked quickly past the kitchen island, heading toward the stairs. Maya watched me quietly from her stool. Her small hands wrapped tightly around the cold bottle of water I had just given her. I climbed the hardwood steps as fast as my knees would allow, my heavy boots thudding against the carpeted runner. I reached the second-floor landing and pushed open the door to Hunter's bedroom. The room was perfectly spotless. His bed was neatly made. His favorite baseball trophies were aligned perfectly on the wooden shelf. I walked over to his large double closet and pulled the doors open. His expensive leather suitcase was completely missing. The heavy winter coats were pushed aside, and all of his warm-weather vacation clothes, his swim trunks, his sunglasses, his favorite polo shirts were entirely gone. My stomach completely dropped as the horrifying truth finally clicked into place. They had not left both of their children behind to go on a romantic couple's getaway. They had intentionally packed up their 9-year-old biological son and taken him on a $50,000 luxury vacation while deliberately leaving their 7-year-old adopted daughter behind with a negligent teenage stranger. The sheer cruelty of that decision washed over me like a bucket of freezing water. I stood there in my grandson's pristine bedroom and felt a profound, overwhelming sense of failure. I had spent my entire life trying to teach my son the value of family, the importance of protecting the vulnerable, and the absolute necessity of keeping your word. I had built an empire so my family would never know struggle, but in doing so, I had somehow funded the creation of a monster. Derek and Brittany had brought Maya into their home 4 years ago, plastering her face all over their social media to show the world how generous and progressive they were. But when the cameras were turned off, this was the reality. She was an inconvenience. She was a prop they could easily discard when she did not fit into their picture-perfect affluent lifestyle. I walked out of Hunter's room and closed the door firmly behind me. I went down the hall to Maya's bedroom, grabbed her small pink duffel bag from the bottom of her closet, and began throwing her clothes inside. I packed her favorite sweaters, her warm socks, her toothbrush, and the small stuffed bear she had held onto since the day she was adopted. Every item I placed into that bag was another nail in the coffin of my relationship with my son. I zipped the bag shut with a sharp, final tug. I walked back downstairs, carrying her bag in one hand and my heavy heart in the other. Maya was still sitting exactly where I had left her, her big brown eyes tracking my every movement. "We are going to my house, sweetheart," I told her, my voice thick with an emotion I could barely control. "You are going to stay with Grandpa for a while, and we are going to have a wonderful time. I promise you that." She nodded slowly, slipping off the tall bar stool and reaching out to take my hand. Her tiny fingers felt so fragile against my rough, calloused palm. I led her out of the kitchen, through the ruined living room, and out the broken front door. The freezing night air hit us immediately, but she was wrapped securely in my heavy denim jacket. I lifted her into the passenger seat of my truck, buckled her in tight, and turned up the heater until the cabin was blowing warm air. As I reversed the truck out of the torn-up driveway and left that cursed house behind, I glanced at Maya in the rearview mirror. She was already falling asleep, her head resting against the cold window glass. I drove back to my estate in absolute silence, the dark Texas roads stretching endlessly before me. The tires hummed a steady rhythm against the pavement, giving me time to process the magnitude of the betrayal. My mind was racing, calculating every single move I was going to make next to protect this little girl. I was not just going to yell at them over the telephone. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire lives piece by piece until they had absolutely nothing left. I would ensure that they faced the consequences of their vile actions, no matter how much it cost me, financially or emotionally. Have you ever looked at your own flesh and blood and realized the absolute monster you accidentally raised? Have you ever had to destroy the very life you built for your child because they proved they did not deserve it? If you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth and abused your kindness, hit subscribe, because you will not believe what I did next. The sun rose over my estate, casting long golden shadows across the sprawling front lawn. I had not slept a single wink. I sat in my heavy leather armchair by the window, a cold cup of black coffee resting next to me. The house was completely silent. Upstairs, Maya was fast asleep in a guest bedroom. After bringing her home, I sat by her bed until her breathing steadied. I pulled the thick down comforter up to her chin, making sure she felt safe. Now it was morning, and it was time to start the reckoning. I glanced at the antique clock on the wall. The time was exactly 8 in the morning. Down in Miami, the massive cruise ships would be finalizing boarding procedures, preparing to set sail across the Caribbean. I reached into my denim jacket, pulled out my smartphone, and dialed his phone number. I did not text. I did not leave a message. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to hear the exact tone he used when he tried to deceive the man who gave him everything. The phone rang 3 times before the line clicked open. Immediately, the booming blast of a cruise ship horn echoed through the speaker. It was a deep, resonating sound that vibrated right through the earpiece. In the background, I could hear the lively chatter of excited passengers, the clinking of glasses, and a tropical steel drum band playing a very cheerful melody. It was the undeniable sound of a tropical luxury vacation. "Hey, Dad," Derek answered. His voice was incredibly smooth, very casual and unbothered. "What is going on? We are just getting settled on the oasis of the seas. The suite is absolutely incredible." I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my heart rate to remain steady. I needed him to think I was completely in the dark. I needed him to dig his own grave with his own words. "Good morning, Derek," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "I just called the house to check on the kids, but nobody answered the landline. I wanted to wish you both a good trip." There was a brief pause on his end. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he formulated his lie. "Oh, right," Derek said, letting out a heavy, exaggerated sigh. "Listen, Dad, we had a sudden emergency yesterday afternoon. Maya came down with a terrible flu. She was running a high fever, coughing the whole 9 yards. We took her to the doctor, and he said she absolutely could not travel. He said being on a ship with thousands of people would be dangerous for her." I tightened my grip on the phone until the plastic creaked. "Is that so?" I asked quietly. "A terrible flu." "Yeah. It was heartbreaking." Derek continued, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We had to make a tough call at the last minute. We did not want to ruin the trip for Hunter, because he has been looking forward to this for months. So we decided it was best if Maya stayed home recovered and rested. Do not worry, though. We hired a highly recommended nursing student to watch her. She is extremely professional. Maya is perfectly safe and getting round-the-clock care. A nursing student." That was what he actually called the passed-out teenager I had found on the couch, surrounded by empty liquor bottles. I closed my eyes, feeling a cold wave of absolute disgust wash over my body. I knew my son was selfish, but I had never realized he was a pathological liar, capable of this level of deceit. "Are you sure she is okay, Derek?" I pressed, testing the waters just a little further. I could drive over there right now and check on her myself. "You know I do not mind helping out." The casual tone in his voice instantly vanished, replaced by a sharp edge of irritation. "Dad, please do not do that," he snapped. "You do not need to go over there and start constantly micromanaging. The sitter is a professional. She knows exactly what she is doing. Honestly, this is exactly the kind of thing Brittany and I were talking about the other day." "What kind of thing?" I asked, leaning forward in my chair. "Your boundary issues," Derek said, his voice rising in volume. "You are always hovering over us. You treat me like I am still a teenager instead of the CEO of your company. You never let us parent our own children without questioning every single decision we make. It is exhausting, Dad. You are becoming a paranoid old man, and you need to step back. We handled the situation perfectly. Maya is fine. Hunter is happy. We are going to enjoy our vacation, and I need you to respect our own boundaries and stay away from the house." He was gaslighting me. He was actively trying to make me feel guilty for caring about my own granddaughter. He wanted me to believe that my natural instinct to protect my family was a toxic flaw. It was a very manipulative tactic. If I had not kicked down that front door at 3 in the morning, if I had not seen the terror inside her eyes, I might have believed him. I might have apologized and left them alone. But I knew the truth. I had the physical proof of his negligence sitting in my guest bedroom. I had the sticky note in my pocket. I had the image of those trespassing teenagers burned into my memory. I had everything I needed to destroy his carefully constructed illusion. I opened my mouth, prepared to drop the hammer. I was going to tell him exactly where I had been a few hours ago. I was going to tell him that his professional nursing student had turned his luxury home into a loud nightclub. I was going to tell him that his sick daughter had been freezing in a closet while he ordered room service. Derek listened to me very carefully. I started, my voice dropping an octave, preparing to unleash my absolute fury. But before I could say another word, I heard a sudden rustling on the other end of the line. The phone was abruptly snatched away from his hand. I heard him let out a loud, startled protest, followed by the sharp, undeniable sound of high heels clicking hard against a wooden deck. The next voice that came through the speaker did not belong to my lying son. "Listen to me, Rick." Her voice sliced through the cheerful background music of the luxury cruise ship like a freshly sharpened kitchen knife. It was Brittany. She did not bother with the usual fake pleasantries. She did not call me Dad like she normally did when she wanted me to co-sign a loan or pay for a home renovation. The sweet, overly polite daughter-in-law act she had perfected over the last decade was completely gone. In its place was the cold, calculating woman I always suspected was hiding just beneath the surface. I could picture her standing on the sun-drenched deck of that massive ship, probably holding a mimosa in one hand and my son's phone in the other, glaring out at the ocean with absolute entitlement. Derek is far too nice to say what actually needs to be said. She continued, her tone dripping with absolute venom. So I am going to make this very simple for you. Hunter worked incredibly hard this year. He got straight A's in all of his advanced classes. He won his tennis tournament, and he has been a perfect son. He deserves to be celebrated. He deserves a luxury trip where he can have the full attention of his parents without any distractions. I sat completely still in my armchair, my fingers tightly gripping the fabric of my denim jacket. "Distractions," I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "Are you referring to your daughter as a distraction?" She let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Let us be real, Rick. Maya is exhausted. She is always whining, always crying about her so-called abandonment issues every time we try to do something special as a family. It is emotionally draining for Hunter, and it is exhausting for us. We needed a break from it. We are not going to let a difficult child ruin our peace of mind. She is perfectly fine with the babysitter. We left her plenty of frozen meals and a list of emergency numbers." Frozen meals. I echoed the sheer absurdity of her statement, making my blood boil. You left a 7-year-old little girl eating frozen dinners with an unqualified teenager while you sail around the Caribbean. "Yes, we did," Brittany snapped back immediately, entirely unashamed. "And you need to back off. We are the parents. We make the rules. We are not going to let you hover over us and ruin our $50,000 vacation just because you feel sorry for her. Do not call this phone again until we are back on dry land. Have a great weekend, Rick." Before I could utter another syllable, a sharp click echoed through the speaker. The line went completely dead. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the dark screen. The silence in my living room was deafening compared to the festive cruise ship horns I had just been listening to. I did not yell. I did not throw the phone across the room or punch a hole in the drywall. That is the kind of reckless emotional reaction weak men have when they lose control of a situation. I am not a weak man. I am a builder. When I find a crack in a foundation, I do not scream at the concrete. I grab my tools and I tear it apart to see exactly how deep the rot goes. My mind immediately latched onto one specific detail from Brittany's vicious little speech. The number echoed in my head loud and clear. $50,000. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. A $50,000 vacation. That number simply did not make any logical sense. I built the company Derek currently runs. I sit as the chairman of the board. I know the exact salary my son brings home every single month down to the last penny. I know his annual bonuses. I know his tax bracket. I know exactly how much they spend on their luxury cars, their country club memberships, and their expensive dinners. I know their financial habits because I am the one who structured the family accounts to ensure they would never go bankrupt. Derek makes a very comfortable living, but he is notoriously bad at saving his money. They live an incredibly flashy lifestyle that eats up almost his entire paycheck. A spontaneous $50,000 luxury cruise for 3 people on the most expensive ship in the Royal Caribbean Fleet was an astronomical expense. It was not a weekend getaway. That kind of money requires serious planning or a massive sudden withdrawal of cash. Where did that money come from? The uneasy feeling in my gut began to twist into something far more sinister than simple anger. My instincts, honed over 40 years of dealing with shady contractors and corrupt suppliers, were screaming at me. People like Derek and Brittany do not suddenly find 50 grand lying around in their couch cushions. They either borrowed it, which I would know about since I monitor the company credit lines, or they stole it. I stood up slowly from my old leather armchair, the cold coffee sitting on the small side table completely forgotten. I walked out of the living room and headed straight down the long carpeted hallway toward my home office. The room was dark, lined with heavy oak bookshelves, and filled with the scent of old paper and leather. I sat down at my large mahogany desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. I did not need to shout. I did not need to argue with a fool on a boat. I needed hard data. I needed clear paper trails. I placed my hands on the cold keyboard and took a deep breath. I was going to carefully dig through every single financial record my family had ever created until I finally found the ugly truth hiding deep within the numbers. The bright screen of my laptop illuminated my tired, lined face as I sat silently and stared at the blinking cursor. When I purchased that sprawling $1.2 million suburban estate for Derek and Brittany, I did not just blindly hand them the keys. I wanted to make sure they were protected. I am a retired construction mogul, and I know exactly how vulnerable a large, isolated suburban home can be. So I personally oversaw the installation of a state-of-the-art smart home security system. It had everything: motion sensors, biometric locks, and high-definition cameras covering every single common area: the front porch, the backyard, the living room, and the kitchen. Derek knew about the cameras, of course, but he was always too lazy to manage the software updates or monitor the storage drives. He handed the master administrator access back to me years ago, claiming he did not want to deal with the technical hassle. Now that laziness was going to be his ultimate downfall. I opened the security application and typed in my master password. The dashboard loaded immediately, displaying a grid of black squares that quickly flickered to life, showing the current state of the empty, ruined house. But I did not care about the present moment. I needed to see the past. I navigated to the cloud storage archive and selected the footage from exactly 24 hours ago, right around the time they would have been packing their bags for the airport. I clicked on the kitchen camera. The high-definition video buffered for a fraction of a second before playing smoothly. There was no audio at first, just the crisp, clear visual of my family going about their morning routine. I reached forward and unmuted the volume slider. The familiar sounds of a typical busy suburban morning slowly filled my quiet home office. The clinking of cereal bowls, the low hum of the refrigerator, and the soft chatter of children. I watched intently as Maya walked into the frame. My heart pounded against my ribs. According to Derek's smooth lie on the phone, she was supposed to be suffering from a terrible, debilitating flu. He claimed she was running a high fever and coughing uncontrollably. But the little girl on my laptop screen was practically skipping across the pristine quartz floor. She was wearing her favorite bright yellow dress, holding a piece of toast, and giggling loudly as she chased her older brother Hunter around the large kitchen island. She did not have a fever. She was not coughing. She was radiating the boundless, joyful energy of a perfectly healthy 7-year-old child who thought she was about to go on a wonderful family vacation. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach as I watched her bright, innocent smile. The flu was a complete fabrication. It was a calculated, deliberate lie designed to cover up something much darker. On the screen, Brittany walked into the kitchen carrying a sleek designer handbag. She looked at Maya with an expression of pure, unfiltered disdain. It was the kind of look you would give an insect that had just crawled across your dining table. "Hunter, Maya, go up to your rooms and make sure your travel bags are zipped," Brittany ordered sharply. Her voice was cold and commanding. Maya immediately stopped smiling, put down her toast, and obediently marched out of the kitchen with her brother. The moment the children were out of earshot, Derek walked into the frame holding 2 printed boarding passes. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Brittany, Derek asked, his voice low and hesitant. "We could just bring her along. The suite is large enough, and my dad is going to ask questions if we leave her behind." Brittany slammed her designer bag onto the kitchen island, her face twisting into a mask of ugly, venomous anger. "No, Derek," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger directly at his chest. "I am not bringing that charity case into the VIP suite. This is a $50,000 luxury experience. I have spent months planning my wardrobe and curating my social media posts. She ruins my Instagram aesthetic. Every time we take a family photo, people ask questions. I am sick of pretending to be the perfect savior mother for a child I never even wanted. We are taking Hunter, and we are leaving her here. You already hired that cheap babysitter from the internet. It is done." Derek stood there in silence for a very long moment, staring blankly at his wife. He had the chance to be a man to protect the innocent child he legally swore to love. Instead, he simply lowered his head, nodded, and placed the 2 boarding passes on the counter. "Fine," he muttered. "I will tell my dad she got the flu. He always believes me." I sat in the dim light of my office, my hands trembling over the keyboard. I reached out and paused the video, freezing Brittany's hateful face on the screen. The cruelty of what I witnessed defied human logic. This was not a panicked decision made during a stressful morning. This was premeditated malice. They planned to abandon her all along. They viewed her as a prop, an ugly accessory that ruined the glamorous image they projected to their wealthy friends. But as the initial shock subsided, my mind latched onto the detail that made no sense. Brittany said it again. A $50,000 experience. Derek accepted that figure as normal. I intimately knew every detail of my son's accounts. He did not have $50,000 to blow on a whim. The stolen money had to come from somewhere else. If they were capable of this depravity, what else were they doing? I closed the camera application and opened my secure banking portal. It was time to follow the money. I closed the security camera window and opened a new tab on my secure encrypted browser. When I officially retired and handed the reins of the construction company over to Derek, I did not just walk away from the financial empire I had spent 40 years building. I established a comprehensive network of family trusts. I wanted to ensure that my wealth would be protected from bad investments, greedy partners, and foolish impulses. I set up separate accounts for my son, my grandchildren, and the corporate reserve. I still held the title of the primary trustee, which meant I retained the legal authority to monitor every single cent that moved through our family network. I reached into the top drawer of my mahogany desk and pulled out a small metal security token. I pressed the button, read the 6-digit code that flashed on the tiny screen, and typed it into the banking portal. The system verified my identity and granted me full access to the master dashboard. This was the digital vault that held the future of our entire bloodline. Every dollar was supposed to be a building block for the next generation, protected by strict legal covenants that I had personally drafted with my team of top corporate attorneys. The screen populated with rows of numbers charts and transaction histories. My eyes immediately scanned the columns, searching for the specific anomaly I knew had to be there. I started by pulling up Derek and Brittany's primary joint checking account. I scrolled through their recent activity, expecting to see a massive deficit or a newly opened line of credit. Instead, I found their usual pattern of reckless, irresponsible spending. There were ridiculous charges for expensive country club dinners, luxury car leases, and high-end designer clothing boutiques. Their balance was alarmingly low, barely enough to cover the upcoming property taxes on their summer cabin, but there was no single withdrawal large enough to fund a luxury vacation. I moved on to Derek's personal corporate credit card, the one he was only supposed to use for legitimate business expenses. I analyzed the monthly statements line by line. While there were certainly a few questionable business lunches that looked more like personal parties, there was absolutely no sign of a $50,000 charge to a cruise line. They had not used their own money. They had not used the corporate account. I leaned closer to the screen, the blue light reflecting off my glasses. If they did not drain their own accounts, they had to have accessed the broader family trust. The feeling of dread in my stomach intensified. I navigated away from their personal profiles and opened the master ledger, a comprehensive record that tracked the movement of capital across all the auxiliary funds I had established. I set the search filter to flag any transaction exceeding $10,000 within the last 60 days. I pressed the Enter key and waited for the database to process the request. The little loading circle spun around and around, building the tension in the quiet, empty room. Finally, the screen refreshed. A short list of high-value transactions appeared before me. Most of them were routine corporate tax payments and quarterly dividend transfers that I had personally authorized. But right there, sitting near the very top of the list, was an anomaly that made my blood run entirely cold. It was an outgoing wire transfer. The amount was exactly $50,000. I moved my cursor over the transaction line and clicked to expand the details. The digital receipt unfurled on my screen, displaying the intricate routing numbers and the final destination of the massive sum of money. The recipient institution was listed clearly in bold black letters. Royal Caribbean International. The transaction had been initiated and fully cleared exactly 3 weeks ago, perfectly aligning with the timeline of when Derek first mentioned the idea of taking a family vacation. My jaw tightened so hard my teeth began to ache. They had actually done it. They had wired $50,000 in cash directly to the cruise line to pay for their luxurious presidential suite and their extravagant spa packages. But the most important piece of the puzzle was still missing. I needed to know exactly which sub-account they had raided to get their hands on that kind of money. Derek only had signing authority on a very select few of the trust accounts, primarily the ones designated for emergency medical expenses and educational development. I took a deep, steadying breath. My hand hovered over the computer mouse. I knew that whatever name appeared on the next screen was going to fundamentally change the way I viewed my son for the rest of my life. I clicked on the origin routing number, requesting the system to trace the funds back to their absolute source. The banking portal paused for a moment, communicating with the secure servers located hundreds of miles away. The silence in my office was heavy, broken only by the soft, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock standing in the corner of the room. I watched the progress bar inch its way across the top of the monitor. My mind raced through the possibilities. Had they drained the emergency medical fund I set up for my late wife? Had they managed to liquidate the emergency property repair bonds? The progress bar reached the end. The screen flashed white for a fraction of a second, and then the final digital document loaded into view. I stared at the bold black text at the very top of the page. It was the title of the specific trust fund that had been completely emptied to pay for the cruise. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands began to shake with a level of rage I had never experienced in my 72 years of life. The account name loaded on the screen. It was Maya's Educational Trust Fund. The glowing letters on the screen burned into my retinas. Maya's Educational Trust. I had personally established that account the very week her adoption was finalized. I seeded it with enough capital to guarantee that little girl would have a fully funded education. It was supposed to cover the best private schools, a premier university, and maybe even a down payment on her first home. Derek was a secondary signatory intended only to authorize future tuition. I never in my darkest nightmares imagined he would exploit a legal loophole to classify a luxury cruise as an educational, cultural experience to bypass the bank's automated fraud triggers. The sheer, unadulterated evil of that action made me physically sick. They did not just abandon her with a drug addict. They actively robbed her. They reached into her future, stole her security, and used it to buy caviar and champagne for their biological son. They financed their own child's temporary pleasure by permanently destroying the financial safety net of the daughter they pretended to love. It was a level of sociopathic greed that I could barely comprehend. My own flesh and blood had become a thief. I pushed my chair back from the heavy mahogany desk, unable to look at the glowing monitor for another second. The air in my home office suddenly felt too thick to breathe. I needed to see her. I needed to look at the little girl whose future they had just stolen. I walked down the hallway, my boots making no sound on the carpet. The morning sun cast bright pools of light across the floor. I made my way toward the kitchen where I had left Maya eating breakfast earlier. As I stepped through the arched doorway, I stopped and simply watched her for a moment. She sat at the granite table dwarfed by the heavy oak chair. She had found crayons and scrap paper. Her tiny legs kicked back and forth beneath the table as she focused intensely on her drawing. She looked so small, so incredibly fragile, and yet so peaceful. Her dark hair fell softly around her face, hiding the lingering redness around her eyes from the tears she had cried the night before. She did not look like a burden. She did not look like a distraction or a charity case or any of the horrible things Brittany had called her. She looked like a sweet, innocent child who just wanted to be loved. I felt a painful lump form in my throat. I had spent my entire life building strong structures. I poured concrete foundations meant to withstand hurricanes. But right now, looking at this little girl, I felt like everything I had built was crumbling around me. I took a deep breath, forcing my face into a gentle, reassuring smile, and walked into the bright kitchen. Maya looked up when she heard my footsteps. She dropped her blue crayon and shrank back into her chair. It was the reflexive flinch of a child who is constantly expecting to be yelled at. "What are you drawing there, sweetheart?" I asked softly, pulling up a chair and sitting down right next to her. She hesitated for a second, before slowly sliding the piece of paper toward me. It was a drawing of a giant ship sailing on a bright blue ocean. There was a big yellow sun in the corner, and tiny stick figures waving from the top deck. My heart shattered all over again. She knew exactly where they went. She knew they were on a boat. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I am sorry I was bad." I frowned, completely confused by her words. "What do you mean, Maya? You have not done anything bad." She looked down at her small hands, twisting her fingers together nervously. "Mommy told me that if I was a good girl I could go on the big boat too. She said my crying ruins everything. I guess I cried too much, and that is why they had to leave me behind. I promise I will be better. I will be quiet. Please do not send me away." The absolute cruelty of Brittany's psychological abuse hit me like a physical blow. They had actually convinced this precious child that her own abandonment was her fault. They made her believe she deserved to be left behind because she expressed normal human emotions. I slowly reached out and gently placed my large, rough hand over her tiny, trembling fingers. "You listen to me, Maya," I said, making sure my voice was incredibly steady and full of absolute conviction. "You are not bad. You are perfect. You are a wonderful, beautiful, perfect little girl, and you did absolutely nothing wrong. You are never going to be sent away. You belong here with me, and nobody is ever going to hurt you or make you feel bad about crying ever again. Do you understand me?" She looked up into my eyes, searching for any sign of a lie. When she found none, a small tentative smile slowly appeared on her face. She nodded and whispered, "Okay, Grandpa." I leaned over and kissed the top of her head. I told her to keep drawing her beautiful picture and that I would be right back with a special treat for her. I stood up and walked out of the kitchen, my blood burning with a righteous fury I had never known. The sadness was gone. The shock had completely evaporated. Only pure, unadulterated wrath remained. My son and his wife had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had violently stolen her money, destroyed her confidence, and abandoned her to suffer. I walked straight back into my dark office and closed the heavy oak door behind me. I walked over to my desk, bypassing the glowing computer screen, and reached for my phone. It was time to stop being a father. It was time to go to war. I sat back in my heavy leather chair and picked up my cell phone. The screen was still cold against my palm. I bypassed my contacts and scrolled to a private number I had not dialed in over 3 years. The number belonged to Michael Rossi. Michael was not a gentle family lawyer who handled minor disputes and polite mediations. He was a ruthless corporate bulldog, a legal predator I used to deploy whenever a rival contractor tried to cheat me or a supplier attempted to break an ironclad contract. He was expensive, entirely void of empathy, and he was exactly the man I needed right now. The phone rang only twice before he picked up. "Good morning, Richard." Michael answered, his voice sharp and businesslike, completely masking any surprise at hearing from me after so long. "I hope retirement is treating you well." "It was until about 6 hours ago," I replied, my voice steady and devoid of any warmth. "I need you to drop whatever case you are currently working on. I am initiating a hostile takeover of my own company, and I need a series of legal documents drafted and executed before the end of the business day." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of Michael typing on his keyboard. "You have my full, undivided attention, Richard," he said. "Tell me exactly what we are dealing with." "My son Derek has just committed felony wire fraud and corporate embezzlement," I stated flatly, not sugarcoating the reality of the situation. "He bypassed the security protocols on a restricted family educational trust and illegally transferred $50,000 directly to Royal Caribbean International. He is currently on one of their ships actively spending the stolen money. Furthermore, he took the company credit cards with him. I need those cards frozen immediately, and I need the bank notified of the fraudulent activity." I heard the sharp intake of breath from Michael. "Fraud against a family trust is a serious federal offense, Richard." He noted his tone shifting from polite professional to pure legal strategist. "If we report this to the banking authorities, there is no stepping back. Your son will be facing severe criminal charges, not just a slap on the wrist." "I am well aware of the consequences, Michael," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. He made his choice when he stole from his own daughter. I am making mine. I want the termination papers drafted immediately. Derek is officially removed from his position as the Chief Executive Officer of Caldwell Construction, effective retroactively as of this morning. Cut off his access to the corporate servers, disable his company email accounts, and revoke his signing authority on all business ledgers. He is entirely stripped of his power. "Consider it done," Michael replied smoothly. "I will have my paralegals push the corporate card freezes through the emergency fraud department within the next 10 minutes. He will try to buy a drink on that ship this afternoon, and his card will be declined. What else do you need?" We are going to take his house, I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the heavy mahogany desk. He lives in the property, located in the Lincoln Park subdivision, but he does not actually own it. That house is legally titled under Caldwell Holdings LLC, which I completely control. I want a formal 3-day eviction notice drafted immediately. Cite violation of the morality clause and criminal negligence on the premises. I want them legally locked out of that property by the time they return to port. Michael let out a low whistle. You are completely dismantling his entire life, Richard. A 3-day eviction is aggressive, but given the corporate ownership structure, we have absolute legal standing to execute it. We can post the notice on the front door by noon tomorrow. No, I interrupted him. Do not post it on the empty house. He left his 7-year-old adopted daughter behind with a negligent teenage stranger last night. I had to kick the front door down at 3 a.m. to rescue her from a house full of trespassing delinquents. He abandoned her, Michael. He left her freezing in a closet while he went on a luxury vacation. The line went dead silent for several seconds. Even a hardened corporate shark like Michael Rossi was momentarily stunned by the sheer depravity of that revelation. When he finally spoke again, his voice lacked any trace of its usual cynical detachment. Richard, that is not just a civil matter. That is felony child endangerment. The state of Texas will throw the absolute book at him for that. We can loop in Child Protective Services and have law enforcement waiting for him the second he steps off that boat. That is exactly the plan. I confirmed, my voice as cold as ice. But before the police get to him, I am going to look him in the eye and deliver the consequences myself. I want the termination papers, the trust fraud documentation, and the legal eviction notice printed on heavy stock paper. I need them fully notarized and ready for my signature within the hour. Send a courier to my estate the second they are ready. I will have the entire packet finalized and sent to your house within 45 minutes. Michael assured me, the rapid clicking of his keyboard returning with frantic intensity. I will also preemptively freeze the joint checking accounts connected to the company payroll so he cannot drain any more capital. Once these documents are signed, he is completely finished. Should I email a digital copy of this packet to his personal address so he knows what is coming? No, I said, staring blankly at the dark screen of my computer monitor. Do not send him anything. Let him think he got away with it. I am delivering it by hand. I hung up the phone and left the dark, heavy atmosphere of my home office. I walked back into the bright kitchen where Maya was still meticulously coloring her drawing of the ocean. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes filled with a quiet innocence that instantly reinforced my absolute resolve. I crouched down to her eye level and gave her the warmest, most reassuring smile I could possibly muster. Maya, sweetheart, I said, keeping my voice light and full of excitement. How would you like to go on a special trip with Grandpa right now? We are going to pack our bags and go somewhere warm and beautiful. Her eyes widened in pure disbelief. Are we going on a big boat? She asked, a tentative spark of hope lighting up her small face. We are going on the biggest, best boat in the entire world, I promised her, gently squeezing her shoulder. But first we need to get you some proper vacation clothes. I did not waste a single minute. I helped her put on her warm winter coat, and we drove my heavy truck straight to the most exclusive high-end clothing boutique for children in downtown Dallas. I walked up to the store manager and told her we needed a complete tropical wardrobe immediately. For the next 3 hours, I let Maya point at absolutely anything she wanted. I bought her beautiful flowing sundresses in every single color of the bright rainbow. I bought her expensive designer sandals, a wide-brimmed straw hat, decorated with a soft silk ribbon, tiny high-fashion sunglasses, and a beautifully crafted matching set of premium luggage. I even bought her a stunning necklace with a small silver seashell pendant to commemorate the trip. The saleswomen fussed over her, constantly treating her like absolute royalty. And for the first time since I kicked down that front door, I heard Maya genuinely laugh out loud. By the time we walked out of that brightly lit store, my black card was significantly lighter, but her spirit was soaring. She looked like a little princess completely transformed from the terrified, shivering child I had found hiding in the dark closet just a few hours ago. While she was occupied with a strawberry ice cream cone in the sunny courtyard, I made my next strategic move. I pulled out my phone and dialed the exclusive private concierge number printed on the back of my American Express Centurion card. When the representative answered, I gave him very specific instructions. I needed to board the Royal Caribbean Oasis of the Seas at its first port of call in Nassau, Bahamas early tomorrow morning. I told him I wanted the absolute highest tier accommodation available on the entire vessel, regardless of the price. The concierge put me on a brief hold, working his magic with the top cruise line executives. When he finally returned, he confirmed that the massive 2-story presidential family suite had just been completely secured under my name. It was the most expensive, luxurious room on the massive ship, complete with a private wrap-around balcony, a personal dedicated butler, a grand piano in the living room, and exclusive VIP access to every single private deck on board. I authorized the charge without blinking an eye. I wanted to make absolutely sure that when I stepped onto that ship, I possessed a level of untouchable power and access that completely eclipsed my son and his entitled wife. They thought they were living large in a standard luxury suite using stolen money. I was about to show them what real earned wealth actually looked like in practice. But securing the magnificent room was only half the battle. We still had to intercept a massive ocean liner that was already hundreds of miles out at sea. Commercial flights to the Bahamas were completely booked for the holiday, and dealing with stressful airport layovers would waste precious time I simply did not have. I called a private aviation broker I had used frequently during my corporate days and chartered a mid-sized luxury jet to fly us directly from the private terminal in Dallas straight to Nassau. The immediate cost was exorbitant, but I did not care in the slightest. Every single dollar spent was an investment in the complete destruction of his web of pathetic lies. Before heading to the airfield, we returned to the estate to pack my own travel bag. I threw in a few casual shirts, a sharp linen suit, and the notarized legal documents Michael had just delivered. I placed those terrible papers right at the top of my suitcase. As the sun began to set over the vast Texas landscape, Maya and I boarded the sleek white private jet, parked quietly on the private tarmac. She held my hand tightly, her beautiful eyes wide with absolute wonder, as the sharply dressed flight attendant handed her a warm chocolate chip cookie and strapped her securely into a plush leather seat. I sat directly across from her, watching the powerful engines roar to life. The plane accelerated swiftly down the smooth runway and lifted smoothly into the evening sky, leaving the cold reality of Dallas far behind us. I looked out the small window at the quickly disappearing city lights, feeling a dark, cold sense of righteous anticipation settling deep in my chest. They abandoned this precious little girl to chase a pathetic, selfish illusion of luxury. They drained her secure future to fund their own temporary pleasure, thinking I would just be a naive old man who blindly bought their ridiculous lies. Have you ever looked at your own family and realized they needed to be taught a brutal lesson they would never ever forget? If you know what it feels like to protect the innocent from the greedy, let me know in the comments below. They wanted a luxury vacation without her. I decided to give them a vacation they would never forget. The morning sun in Nassau, Bahamas was blindingly bright as our private jet touched down on the smooth concrete runway. The heavy, humid tropical air hit my face the moment the cabin doors opened, carrying the distinct, salty scent of the ocean. A sleek black luxury SUV was already waiting for us right on the tarmac, bypassing the crowded, chaotic customs terminals entirely without waiting. Maya held onto my hand tightly, her small face pressed firmly against the tinted window of the car as we drove toward the massive commercial port. When the cruise terminal finally came into view, she let out a loud gasp of absolute pure amazement. Docked against the concrete pier was the oasis of the seas. It was not just a boat. It was a floating, towering city of white steel and tinted glass, massive enough to block out the horizon. It was a monument to excess and luxury. And somewhere deep inside that floating fortress, my thieving son and his entitled wife were currently enjoying the vacation they had stolen from the little girl sitting right next to me. When we arrived at the busy port, we did not join the thousands of regular passengers sweating in the long, winding security lines. Instead, our driver pulled the vehicle directly up to a private, beautifully landscaped entrance marked exclusively for the owners' club. The moment we stepped out of the air-conditioned car, a team of impeccably dressed staff members was there to greet us. A man in a crisp white uniform immediately took our luggage while a polite, smiling woman holding a digital tablet verified my black card credentials. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice dripping with polished professionalism. "Your presidential suite is completely ready for you. Please follow me." We bypassed every single checkpoint. We walked through private velvet-roped corridors and stepped into an exclusive glass elevator that shot us straight up to the absolute highest deck of the entire ship. The heavy doors opened to a private, silent hallway lined with thick plush carpets and mahogany wood paneling. Our massive suite was located at the very end of the corridor. When the concierge opened the heavy double doors, even I was momentarily taken aback by the sheer scale of the luxury. The room was a sprawling two-story penthouse with massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the vast blue ocean. There was a grand piano sitting in the center of the expansive living room, a massive private balcony featuring a bubbling hot tub, and a winding glass staircase leading up to the spacious master bedrooms. Maya immediately dropped her little pink bag and ran into the center of the room, spinning around with a huge, joyful smile on her face. "Grandpa," she laughed, her bright voice echoing in the massive space. "This is the biggest room in the world." I smiled back at her, feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction. This was the exact room her stolen trust fund money was supposed to help pay for, except Derek, and Brittany had settled for a much smaller suite a few decks below us. I had intentionally outspent them, outclassed them, and positioned myself at the very top of the hierarchy. After we unpacked our light luggage, I decided to take Maya out to explore the exclusive VIP decks, reserved strictly for the highest-paying guests. I wanted to make sure she felt completely safe and completely spoiled. We found a quiet, shaded cabana near a beautiful infinity pool, and I bought her a large cup of artisan strawberry gelato. She sat on the plush lounge chair, swinging her legs happily, as she ate the sweet dessert, completely oblivious to the dark storm clouds gathering right below her feet. She looked peaceful, a perfect picture of innocent childhood joy. But while she was happily enjoying her ice cream, I was not relaxing. I was working. My eyes were constantly moving, scanning the crowded decks below us with the cold precision of a seasoned sniper. I watched the thousands of people milling around the massive ship. I studied the layout of the swimming pools, the outdoor bars, and the central promenade. I was actively hunting. I was looking for the familiar shape of my son, or the loud laugh of my daughter-in-law. I knew they were out there somewhere, likely lounging by a crowded public pool, or charging expensive drinks to the corporate credit card I was about to deactivate. The contrast between my granddaughter's innocent joy and my own brewing vengeance was sharp. I was a protective grandfather on the surface, but underneath I was an executioner preparing to drop the heavy blade. I wiped a small smudge of pink gelato from Maya's cheek with a napkin and told her to enjoy the sunshine while I took care of one small piece of business. I walked over to the private concierge desk located near the entrance of our exclusive deck. The man standing behind the polished marble counter stood up completely straight the second I approached. "How may I assist you this afternoon?" "Mr. Caldwell?" he asked politely. I reached into the breast pocket of my linen suit and pulled out a crisp, brand-new $500 bill. I folded it once and slid it smoothly across the cold marble surface, resting my hand heavily over the money. "I need a specific piece of information," I told him, keeping my voice low and authoritative. "I have a family member currently traveling on this ship. His name is Derek Caldwell. I need to know exactly which specialty restaurant he has booked for dinner tonight, and I need you to secure the table located directly next to his." The concierge looked down at the large bill, then back up into my cold eyes. He did not ask any questions. He nodded, slid the money off the counter, and began typing rapidly into his terminal. The trap was now officially and permanently set. Evening arrived quickly on the open ocean. I spent the late afternoon helping Maya get ready for what I promised her would be the most spectacular dinner of her life. She chose to wear the new bright yellow sundress we bought in Dallas, along with the silver seashell necklace. I put on my tailored charcoal linen suit, ensuring the heavy envelope containing the legal documents was securely tucked inside the breast pocket. When we stepped out of our suite and walked toward the glass elevator, Maya was practically bouncing on her heels with excitement. She held my hand tightly, completely oblivious to the impending confrontation. I felt a cold, calculated calm wash over me as the elevator descended toward the lower decks. I was not a father going to scold his disobedient son. I was a demolition expert walking onto a job site carrying the precise amount of dynamite needed to bring a corrupt structure straight down to its foundation. The absolute best five-star steakhouse was located at the aft of the vessel, surrounded by massive panoramic windows overlooking the dark, churning wake of the ocean. The ambiance was designed to scream exclusivity. The lighting was dim and warm, the tables were covered in heavy white linen, and the soft melody of a live jazz quartet filled the air. The moment we stepped through the glass doors, the host immediately recognized me from the generous cash tip I had provided his colleague earlier. He offered a slight, knowing bow and quietly asked me to follow him. I kept my grip on her small hand firm but gentle as we wove our way through the crowded, elegant dining room. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead, scanning the tables, until I finally spotted my targets, sitting near the massive rear windows. Derek and Brittany were seated at a prime table, completely absorbed in their own manufactured vanity. They had dressed to the nines, desperate to project the image of a wildly successful upper-class couple. Brittany was wearing a shimmering designer gown, holding her smartphone out on an expensive stabilizing stick. She was actively filming a video vlog for her social media followers. I could hear her high-pitched fake voice carrying over the soft jazz music, bragging to her online audience about the imported beluga caviar they were currently eating. Derek sat across from her wearing a velvet dinner jacket, holding up a crystal flute of expensive champagne and flashing a bright, rehearsed smile for the camera lens. Sitting quietly beside them, looking rather bored and ignored, was my biological grandson, Hunter. The sheer hypocrisy of the scene made my stomach churn. They were playing the role of the perfect family, broadcasting their stolen luxury to the world, while the daughter they abandoned was walking right up behind them. We reached the table located immediately next to theirs. It was so close that I could practically reach out and touch the edge of her chair. The host pulled out a heavy oak chair for Maya, and she climbed up, her eyes wide as she looked at the sparkling crystal glasses and polished silver cutlery. I took the seat directly facing my son. I did not say a single word. I did not clear my throat to announce my presence. I simply sat down, adjusted my suit jacket, and waited for the invisible shockwave to hit them. Complete psychological dominance requires absolute silence. If you scream and yell, you surrender your power to your emotions. If you sit quietly and let your presence do the talking, you force your enemy to drown in their own sudden panic. I watched Brittany through the corner of my eye as she continued to babble into her glowing phone screen. It happened exactly 10 seconds after I sat down. Brittany panned her camera slightly to the right to capture the beautiful ocean view behind them, and in doing so, her phone screen caught my reflection. She stopped talking mid-sentence. Her mouth hung slightly open as she slowly lowered the device. She turned her head, her eyes wide with absolute disbelief, and stared directly at me. The color instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face. The expensive smartphone slipped from her trembling fingers, hitting the edge of the table with a loud clatter before falling onto the carpeted floor. Derek, annoyed by the sudden interruption, looked up from his plate of caviar and turned to see what had startled his wife. When his eyes met mine, it was as if someone had physically punched the breath right out of his lungs. He turned a sickly shade of pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of the water, completely unable to form a single coherent word. I did not break eye contact with my son. I reached forward, picked up the heavy crystal glass of vintage bourbon the waiter had just silently placed on my table, and slowly raised it in the air. I gave Derek a deliberate, silent toast, acknowledging the utter destruction of his pathetic little fantasy. Then I turned my attention entirely away from them, as if they were nothing more than ghosts haunting a cheap motel. A sharply dressed waiter appeared at my side, holding a leather-bound menu. I smiled warmly at the young man and pointed down at Maya. "My beautiful granddaughter has had a very long journey," I told the waiter, my voice clear and carrying perfectly across the small distance between our tables. "I want you to bring her the absolutely best thing on your menu. Bring her the $300 dry-aged Wagyu tomahawk steak cooked to absolute perfection, and an extra-large side of truffle macaroni and cheese." I completely ignored the suffocating, terrified silence radiating from the table next to us. The execution had finally begun. Every single piece of their stolen fake luxury was just about to completely crumble into dust, and I would gladly watch it happen. We finished our dinner in absolute silence. Maya ate every single bite of her expensive meal, entirely unaware of the psychological warfare being waged right next to us. I completely ignored my son and his wife. They did not speak another word. They did not finish their caviar. They simply sat there, paralyzed by the crushing weight of their own exposed guilt. I paid the bill, took her small hand, and walked out. We returned to our massive suite, and I tucked her into the plush bed. She fell asleep almost immediately. With her safely resting, I walked back out into the grand living room, poured myself a glass of water, and waited in the dark. I knew my son. He would not confront me in public. He would have to come to me. The antique clock softly chimed, indicating it was exactly 1 o'clock in the morning. A few moments later, a hesitant knock echoed from the heavy wooden double doors. It was the timid knock of a desperate man. I stood up from the leather sofa, walked over to the coffee table, and pulled my smartphone from my pocket. I opened the voice memo application, pressed the red record button, and carefully slipped the device beneath a thick white linen napkin resting next to a fruit bowl. I smoothed the fabric out so the phone was hidden, but the microphone remained unobstructed. Then I opened the door. Derek stood in the quiet hallway. He had taken off his velvet dinner jacket, and his dress shirt sleeves were rolled up. His hair was messy, and he was sweating profusely. He looked past my shoulder, taking in the sheer size and absolute luxury of the presidential suite. His eyes widened slightly as he processed the grand piano, the glass staircase, and the sweeping ocean views visible through the massive windows. He realized instantly that whatever financial power he thought he had was nothing compared to the empire I still controlled. "Dad." "Please," Derek whispered, his voice cracking with panic. "Can I come in for a minute? We really need to talk about this before it gets out of hand. Please do not make a scene on this ship." I stepped aside, allowing him to enter my space. He walked in nervously, wringing his hands together like a guilty child. I closed the heavy door behind him, sealing us inside the quiet room. The trap was locked. I did not offer him a seat. I simply stood by the grand piano, crossed my arms, and waited. "Dad, I know how this looks." Derek started pacing across the expensive carpet. "I know you are angry about Maya, but you have to understand our position. You do not live with her. She is incredibly difficult to manage. She is constantly crying, overly needy, and she acts out whenever we try to focus on Hunter. It was destroying the family dynamic. Hunter was stressed. We all just needed a short break to reset. That is all this was. A simple, harmless break." I kept my expression perfectly blank. "A break," I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "You left her with a drug-addicted teenager who invited a house full of delinquents over while you sailed away. I had to kick down your front door at 3 in the morning to pull your daughter out of a dark closet. Is that your definition of a harmless break?" Derek swallowed hard, avoiding my eyes. "That babysitter had good reviews online," he lied, his voice shaking. "We had no idea she would do that." And as for the money, Dad, I can explain everything. I know you found out about the trust fund transfer, but it was not stealing. We just borrowed it. The business has been a little slow lately, and we needed to pay for this trip up front. I swear I was going to pay it all back the second my executive bonus cleared. It was just a temporary loan. His pathetic excuses filled the quiet room, each lie more insulting than the last. He actually thought he could manipulate his way out of this with corporate jargon and fake sympathy. He thought I was still the forgiving father who would bail him out of any mess. You borrowed it, I said, taking a slow step toward him. You forged documents to bypass educational restrictions on a secured trust fund, wired $50,000 to a luxury cruise line, and you want me to believe it was a temporary loan. You abandoned a defenseless 7-year-old child in a dangerous environment to go eat caviar, and you want me to believe she was simply too difficult to manage. Derek backed away, hitting the edge of the glass coffee table. Dad, please, you must understand. No, Derek. I interrupted, my voice finally rising, echoing sharply off the high ceilings. I do not have to understand your lies anymore. I am done listening to your pathetic excuses. I know you do not love that little girl. I know Brittany despises her. I saw the security footage. Derek completely froze. The color drained from his face as he realized the true extent of what I knew. He looked at the floor, completely broken, his shoulders sagging in absolute defeat. I took another step forward, towering over my cowardly son. The microphone hidden beneath the napkin was capturing every single shallow breath he took. I am only going to ask you this one time, Derek, I said, my tone dripping with lethal precision. And if you lie to me again, I will personally throw you off the balcony of this ship. Why did you really adopt her? Do not tell me it was out of the goodness of your heart. Do not tell me it was to give Hunter a sister. I want the absolute truth. What is the real reason you and your hateful wife brought that child into my family, only to treat her like trash? Derek stared at me, struggling to find another lie. He looked desperately around the luxurious room as if the expensive artwork would somehow offer him an escape route. But there was nowhere left to run. The silence in the presidential suite was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic sound of the ocean waves crashing against the massive ship. I did not move an inch. I kept my eyes locked onto his, projecting every ounce of absolute disgust and authority. The sheer weight of my stare finally broke whatever pathetic resolve he had left. He ran his trembling hands through his sweaty hair and let out a harsh, bitter laugh. It was not a laugh of humor, but of a man unraveling under the pressure of his deceit. You want the absolute truth, Dad? He asked, his voice suddenly losing its defensive whine and adopting a cold, cynical edge that I had never heard before. You really want to know why we brought her into our perfect little home? Fine. I will tell you everything. But you are not going to like it. He took a deep breath, pacing nervously in front of the grand piano, preparing to unleash a confession that would forever sever our bloodline. 4 years ago, Derek began, his tone flattening into a disturbing business-like cadence. The company was trying to secure a massive government contract for the downtown development project. We were competing against 3 other major construction firms. They were bigger, they had more political connections, and they were squeezing us out of the bidding war. I needed an angle. I needed something that would make our firm stand out to the progressive city council members. Brittany was the one who actually found the solution. She discovered a series of massive minority and family-focused business grants designed to subsidize companies with diverse community-oriented leadership. If we qualified for those grants, we could underbid our competitors by millions of dollars and dominate the local market. But my profile was entirely wrong. I was just a wealthy, privileged executive living in a mansion. We needed a compelling story. We needed a visual representation of our deep commitment to the community. So we went to the adoption agency. We specifically requested a child from a disadvantaged background. Maya was not a daughter to us, Dad. She was a strategic corporate asset. She was the perfect prop for our marketing campaign. We took photos with her, put her face on all our promotional materials, and brought her to every single charity dinner. And it worked beautifully. We won the contracts. We secured the grants. The investors absolutely loved the narrative of the generous, loving family opening their home to an orphan. She made the company millions of dollars in revenue. The words hung in the air, toxic and vile. I felt a cold, sharp pain radiate through my chest, as if a physical blade had just been shoved directly into my heart. I had spent decades building a legacy of integrity. I believed in honest work, fair contracts, and treating people with basic human dignity. And my own son had weaponized the adoption of an innocent child to secure a profit margin. He and his wife had faked 4 years of love, faked family dinners, and faked every single smile, all while treating a traumatized little girl as a disposable piece of corporate marketing collateral. They had monetized her existence. The level of sociopathic calculation was staggering. I thought about Maya sleeping peacefully in the other room, completely unaware that the only reason she had a bed in that house was because her presence satisfied a government grant requirement. I gripped the edge of the piano tightly to stop my hands from shaking. I wanted to strike him. I wanted to grab him by the collar of his expensive shirt and throw him through the panoramic glass window into the dark ocean below. But I forced myself to remain completely silent. I needed him to finish painting his masterpiece of absolute betrayal. And what happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, masking the violent storm raging inside my mind. You secured your contracts. You got your grant money. Why leave her behind? Why drain her trust fund to go on a cruise? Derek stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression devoid of any genuine remorse. Because the grant compliance period officially ended last month, he stated coldly. We do not need the family man optics anymore. The investors are locked in, and the money is safely in the corporate accounts. But Maya is becoming a problem. She requires too much attention. She does not fit in with Hunter, and Brittany is entirely sick of pretending to be her mother. The trust fund money was just an early severance package, Dad. We figured she owed us for putting a roof over her head for the last 4 years. We took the $50,000 as compensation for our trouble, and we booked this cruise to celebrate our freedom. When we dock back in Miami next week, it is finally over. Brittany has already contacted the lawyers and drafted the necessary paperwork. The moment we get home, we are driving her straight back to the agency. We are surrendering her to the state foster care system. We are dissolving the adoption completely. It is a clean break, and then we can finally get back to our real lives. He said it with such casual cruelty, as if he were discussing returning a defective piece of machinery to a hardware store. I had heard enough. I did not need another single syllable of evidence. I walked slowly over to the coffee table, reached under the white linen napkin, and pulled out my smartphone. Derek stared in sheer horror as he realized what the screen meant. I pressed the button, stopping the recording. My eyes were dead cold. Get out of my room, Derek. The execution is set. Derek stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck. He did not say another word. He turned around, his shoulders completely slumped, and dragged himself out of my suite like a condemned man walking toward the gallows. The heavy double doors clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate. I walked back to my bedroom, checked on Maya one last time to ensure she was sleeping peacefully, and then I went to sleep. For the first time in over 24 hours, I slept soundly, knowing that the wheels of justice were finally in motion and could not be stopped. The next morning broke with brilliant sunshine streaming through the massive panoramic windows of our penthouse. I ordered a lavish breakfast from room service for Maya, letting her feast on fresh tropical fruits and warm pastries. While she watched cartoons on the massive flat-screen television, I sat on the private balcony sipping a hot cup of black coffee, waiting for the first domino to fall. I knew my lawyer, Michael Rossi, had spent the entire night processing the paperwork. The trap I had set was fully armed, and Brittany was just about to walk right into it, completely blind. Derek was an absolute coward. I knew with certainty that he had not told his wife about our midnight confrontation. He was too terrified of her wrath and too deeply in denial about his own impending ruin to confess that his father was on the ship, because he chose to remain silent. Brittany woke up that morning believing she was still a wealthy, untouchable socialite. She left her lower deck cabin and made her way up to the exclusive Vitality Spa. She had booked a very premium wellness package, including a hot stone massage, a facial, and a private aromatherapy. The total cost of the indulgence was a staggering $2,000. Brittany strutted into the serene spa reception area wearing designer sunglasses and a silk cover-up. She demanded immediate attention, treating the polite staff members like personal servants. After confirming her extravagant appointments, the receptionist respectfully asked for a credit card to hold the incidentals and process the initial deposit. Brittany practically threw the Caldwell Construction corporate credit card onto the marble counter, flashing a condescending smile at the young woman. The receptionist swiped the sleek metal card through the terminal. The machine beeped very loudly right then. A small red light flashed on the screen. "I am sorry, madam," the receptionist said politely, keeping her voice low. "It seems this card has been declined. Would you happen to have another form of payment?" Brittany scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes in exaggerated annoyance. She leaned over the counter, pointing a sharp finger at the young employee. "There is absolutely nothing wrong with that card," she snapped, her voice breaking the peaceful tranquility of the spa. "It has a limit higher than your lifetime salary. Run it again. Your machine is obviously broken and needs fixing right this minute." The receptionist maintained her professional composure and swiped the card a second time. The exact same red light flashed. The terminal printed a small slip of paper that read, "Account frozen, contact issuer." "I apologize, madam, but the issuer has placed a hard lock on this account due to suspected fraud," the receptionist explained gently. "I cannot process this transaction." Brittany felt her face flush bright red with sudden fury. "Fraud!" she shrieked loudly, drawing the attention of several wealthy guests who were waiting nearby in their plush white robes. "Do you have any idea who I actually am here? My husband is the chief executive officer of a multi-million-dollar development firm. We do not commit fraud. We own people exactly like you." She snatched the corporate card off the counter and aggressively dug into her designer handbag. She pulled out her personal platinum credit card, the one linked directly to their joint checking account back in Dallas. "Try this one," she demanded, slamming it down on the marble surface. "And when it goes through, I want to speak to your manager about your horrible attitude." The receptionist silently swiped the personal card through the machine once again. The terminal hesitated for a moment, before letting out a loud, harsh buzz. "Declined. Account frozen." The sheer impossibility of the situation finally seemed to fully register right on Brittany's pale face. But instead of retreating, her entitlement transformed into a completely unhinged tantrum. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, accusing the spa staff of trying to steal from her, calling them incompetent thieves. She grabbed a display bottle of expensive massage oil and knocked it onto the floor, shattering the glass and spilling the fragrant liquid all over the pristine tile. That was the final straw. The spa manager, an imposing woman who did not tolerate abusive behavior from any passenger, immediately stepped out of her back office and signaled the security team. Within 60 seconds, 3 large ship security officers arrived at the reception area. Brittany was still screaming, demanding her $2,000 treatment, when the officers firmly grabbed her by the arms. "You are destroying private property and disturbing the peace of this vessel," the head security officer stated clearly, his voice booming over her hysterical cries. "We are escorting you out of this facility right this very second." They marched her out. Brittany was forced to walk through the ship in her silk robe, screaming obscenities, while hundreds of passengers stopped to stare and record the humiliating spectacle on their smartphones. Her carefully curated social media aesthetic was completely destroyed. Meanwhile, several decks below, Derek was sitting alone in his small cabin, trying to figure out how to salvage his ruined life. Suddenly, his phone lit up. A notification chimed, then 5 more in rapid succession. The device vibrated uncontrollably as a relentless flood of automated alerts poured in. Every single bank account associated with his name was now officially completely frozen. Derek sat on the bed, his hands shaking as he stared at the screen of his smartphone. The notifications kept piling up one after another, creating a horrifying cascade of financial ruin. His primary checking account was frozen. His savings account was locked. The corporate credit cards were disabled. Even the emergency contingency funds he had secretly stashed away under a different banking branch were completely inaccessible. The reality of his situation was settling over him like a suffocating blanket. He was entirely broke, floating in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles away from home. Before he could even begin to process the magnitude of his absolute destruction, a loud, authoritative knock echoed through his suite. It was not the gentle, polite tapping of their dedicated room butler. It was heavy and demanding. Derek slowly stood up, his legs feeling like lead, and walked toward the heavy wooden door. When he pulled it open, he did not find a smiling staff member holding a tray of fresh fruit. Instead, he was greeted by the ship's chief purser, flanked by 2 large, stern-looking maritime security officers. "Mr. Caldwell," the purser said, his voice entirely devoid of the warm hospitality usually reserved for premium guests. "We have a very serious problem regarding the payment method used to secure this accommodation. The primary corporate card on your file has just been officially flagged by your banking institution for severe fraudulent activity and corporate embezzlement." Derek felt the color drain from his face. He tried to speak, tried to formulate a coherent excuse, but his throat was completely dry. "I can explain this," Derek stammered weakly, gripping the edge of the doorframe for physical support. "It is just a massive misunderstanding with my accounting department back in Dallas. Let me make a phone call and clear this up." The purser shook his head slowly, his expression remaining completely stoic. "There is no misunderstanding, sir. We received direct authorization from the primary account holder to terminate the transaction. Because the funds used to book this luxury suite are currently under federal investigation for fraud, we are legally required to downgrade your reservation immediately. You and your family must vacate this room right this very second." Just as the devastating words left the purser's mouth, Brittany pushed her way through the officers. Her silk robe was slightly wrinkled, and her face was stained with ruined makeup from her humiliating ordeal at the spa. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice trembling with rage. "Why are these security guards standing outside of our private suite?" Derek looked at his wife, his eyes wide with absolute panic. "We are being evicted from the room, Brittany," he whispered, the horrifying truth finally leaving his lips. "My father froze all of the accounts. We have to pack our bags right now." Brittany gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. "You cannot do this!" Brittany screamed at the purser, entirely ignoring the reality of their criminal actions. "We paid for this premium experience. You cannot just throw us out like common criminals." The security officers stepped forward, closing the distance and completely ignoring her frantic protests. "You have exactly 15 minutes to gather your personal belongings," the lead officer commanded firmly. "If you do not comply, we will physically remove you from these premises." The next 15 minutes were a blur of chaos and humiliation. Derek and Brittany frantically threw their expensive designer clothes, their luxury cosmetics, and their shiny new shoes into their suitcases. They did not have time to fold anything neatly. They simply shoved their stolen luxury into bags, while the security guards stood inside their living room, watching their every single move. When the bags were finally zipped, the officers escorted them out of the beautiful room. As they walked down the plush hallway, word of Brittany's unhinged public meltdown at the spa had already spread among the wealthy passengers. People stood in the corridors, watching them being marched away by security. Some passengers pointed. Others openly laughed, whispering to each other about the arrogant couple who tried to pay for a luxury vacation with stolen money. Derek kept his head down, burning with a deep, consuming shame, while Brittany quietly sobbed behind her dark sunglasses. They were led away from the upper decks, away from the sunlight, and away from the fresh ocean breeze. The security team guided them into a cramped service elevator that plunged them down into the bowels of the massive ship. They bypassed the standard passenger floors and descended into the lowest possible deck, a dark, narrow corridor reserved for emergency overflow. The air down there was stale and smelled faintly of industrial cleaning supplies. The lead officer stopped in front of a heavy metal door and unlocked it. "This is your new assigned cabin for the remainder of the voyage," he stated coldly. Derek pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was a tiny, windowless room barely larger than a walk-in closet. There was a small bunk bed, a single metal chair, and absolutely no natural light. The worst part was the noise. The room was located directly above the ship's massive engine room. A continuous mechanical thrumming vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the cheap fixtures on the walls. It was a suffocating, vibrating metal cage. Brittany dropped her expensive designer bag onto the thin mattress and broke down into a hysterical fit of heavy sobbing. Hunter sat on the bottom bunk, looking terrified and confused. Derek stood in the center of the tiny room, the loud hum of the engines mocking his utter failure. He realized the terrifying truth. His father was not just canceling credit cards from a desk back in Texas. This level of precise, timed destruction meant only one thing. Derek dropped his suitcase, his eyes wide with frantic terror, and rushed out the door to search the massive ship for the architect of his demise. Derek sprinted down the narrow, dimly lit corridors of the bottom deck, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The mechanical roar of the ship's engines beneath his feet felt like a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of his privileged life. He did not know exactly where I was, but he knew the layout of the oasis of the seas well enough to guess. He knew that I would be occupying the absolute highest tier of luxury available. He ran toward the central elevator banks, hitting the call button with a trembling fist. A few moments later, Brittany caught up to him, practically out of breath, clutching her ruined silk robe around her waist. Her face was a messy portrait of smeared mascara and sheer desperation. Together they stepped into the elevator, but when Derek swiped his newly downgraded room key to access the upper VIP decks, the panel flashed a harsh red light. Access denied. They were officially locked out of paradise. They were forced to take the crowded public stairs, climbing deck after deck, sweating profusely under the bright fluorescent lights, pushing past hundreds of confused vacationers who stared at their disheveled appearances. By the time they finally reached the topmost level, they were completely exhausted. They stumbled out onto the open-air promenade, squinting against the brilliant Caribbean sunlight. That was when they saw us. We were lounging at the exclusive Owners Club private pool. A serene oasis cordoned off from the rest of the ship by a thick, polished glass partition. The water inside the pool was crystal clear, reflecting the bright blue sky. Maya was happily splashing around in the shallow end, wearing a pair of bright pink sunglasses and playing with a colorful inflatable beach ball I had just bought for her. She looked radiant, completely untouched by the ugly reality unfolding just outside the glass. I was sitting comfortably on a plush, shaded lounge chair, dressed in my crisp linen suit, slowly sipping a glass of iced tea. I looked completely at peace. Derek spotted me and immediately rushed toward the entrance of the VIP enclosure. He tried to push his way through the velvet ropes, but two massive security guards instantly stepped into his path, crossing their arms and blocking his entry. Derek began to plead with them, pointing frantically in my direction, but the guards remained completely unmoved. His downgraded status meant he was nothing more than a nuisance. Defeated at the entrance, Derek walked over to the thick glass partition, pressing his sweaty palms against the clear surface. He tapped on the glass, his face twisted in a pathetic mask of desperation. Brittany stood right behind him, glaring at me with a mixture of absolute hatred and terrifying realization. I took my time. I set my iced tea down on the small table next to my lounger. I gave Maya a reassuring smile, telling her to keep playing and that I would be right back. I slowly stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my suit jacket, and walked over to the glass partition. The barrier was designed to keep the noise of the public decks away from the VIP guests, so I could barely hear the frantic words Derek was trying to shout at me. I gestured for him to walk a few feet to the left, where a small decorative gap existed between the glass panels to allow the ocean breeze to flow through the enclosure. When we stood face to face, separated by a mere inch of open air, the sheer contrast between us was undeniable. I was composed, powerful, and completely in control. My son was a sweaty, shaking, broken shell of a man. "Dad, you have to stop this," Derek begged, his voice cracking violently as it slipped through the narrow gap in the glass. "You froze everything. The bank accounts, the credit cards, the emergency funds. We have absolutely nothing. We are stuck on the bottom deck in a room that smells like diesel fuel. You made your point. Please undo the freezes so we can just go home." I reached inside the breast pocket of my linen suit and slowly pulled out the heavy embossed envelope Michael Rossi had sent me. The thick paper felt substantial in my hands, a physical manifestation of their total ruin. I slipped the envelope through the narrow gap in the glass partition. Derek snatched it with trembling fingers, tearing the seal open with frantic urgency. He pulled out the stack of legally binding notarized documents, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal text. "Let me make this perfectly clear, Derek," I said, my voice steady and cold, carrying easily through the open gap. "I am not trying to make a point. I am executing a complete and total dismantling of the life you stole. Those papers outline the new reality you are going to face when you step off this ship. First, you are officially terminated from Caldwell Construction. You are no longer the chief executive officer. You have no salary, no benefits, and no access to any corporate assets. Second, the company is filing a massive civil lawsuit against you for the $50,000 you embezzled from Maya's trust fund. We will garnish whatever future wages you manage to earn for the rest of your miserable life to pay back every single penny." Derek stared at the papers, his breathing growing shallower by the second. "And the third document," I continued without a single shred of mercy, "is a formal 3-day eviction notice. The house you currently live in belongs to my holding company. Because you committed felony fraud, your lease agreement is immediately null and void. By the time this ship finally docks back in Miami, the locks on those doors will already be changed. Your belongings will be packed in cheap cardboard boxes and left sitting on the front curb. You are entirely homeless, Derek. You are broke, you are unemployed, and you are facing severe criminal charges. You have absolutely nothing left." The papers slipped from Derek's shaking hands, scattering across the wooden deck of the promenade. He fell to his knees, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the destruction I had unleashed upon him. But Brittany did not surrender. She pushed past her broken husband, pressing her face aggressively against the glass partition. Her eyes were wild, completely unhinged by the loss of her precious status. "You cannot do this to us," she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice shrill and echoing across the crowded deck, drawing the shocked stares of dozens of onlookers. "We are your blood. We are your family. You cannot just throw your own family out onto the street. You are a monster." I looked at her, entirely unaffected by her pathetic, desperate screaming. "Blood does not give you the right to abuse the innocent," I replied quietly, stepping away from the glass. "And you stopped being my family the moment you left that little girl alone in the dark." I turned my back on them and walked away. I walked away from the glass partition with slow, deliberate steps. I did not rush. I wanted them to watch the physical distance between us grow, a perfect representation of the absolute unbridgeable chasm they had created. But Derek was simply not ready to accept his inevitable fate. He scrambled frantically along the edge of the barrier, his sweaty hands slapping hard against the thick glass, his voice cracking violently as he called out my name in a tone of pure panic. He pushed past his stunned wife and threw himself onto the polished wooden deck right at the edge of the open gap. He collapsed entirely, falling hard onto his knees. The velvet ropes shook slightly as the private security guards stepped forward to intervene, but I raised a single hand signaling them to hold their positions and let the pathetic scene play out. I wanted to hear the exact sound a man makes when his entire universe collapses under the immense weight of his own calculated greed. Derek was openly weeping now. Heavy tears streamed down his flushed cheeks, mixing with the sweat on his forehead. He looked incredibly pathetic. He looked like a frightened, cornered child finally realizing the immense scale of his terrible mistake. "Dad, wait," he sobbed, his hands clutching the edge of the glass partition as if it were a life preserver floating in a stormy sea. "Please, Dad, just listen to me for one single minute." Derek pleaded, his voice thick with absolute suffocating desperation. "I am so incredibly sorry. I was blind. I was stupid. I let the money and the lifestyle completely cloud my judgment. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can put it all back together. I promise you I will be a better man. I will be a better father. I will go to counseling. We will keep Maya. We will not send her back to the foster care system. I swear it on my own life. We will love her. We will include her in everything we do from now on. Just tell me what you want me to do, and I will do it without question. I will step down from the company voluntarily if you just let us keep the house. Just do not leave us with nothing. Do not take my family away from me." He was practically choking on his own tears, gasping for air between his frantic, empty promises. Brittany had finally stopped screaming and was now standing frozen directly behind him. Her hands covered her mouth in sheer horror as she watched her husband grovel on the floor of a crowded luxury cruise ship. They were completely stripped of their arrogance, reduced to begging on their knees for the pathetic scraps of the wealthy life they had so casually thrown away. It was a miserable sight to behold, a stark contrast to the arrogant couple eating expensive caviar just one night ago. I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still for a long moment, letting his pathetic, desperate words hang in the warm, salty ocean air. Then I slowly turned around and walked right back to the narrow gap in the glass. I looked down at him, my expression completely devoid of any sympathy, pity, or love. I felt absolutely nothing for the broken man kneeling before me. "You are missing the fundamental point, Derek," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the sunny deck like a newly sharpened blade. "You think this is a simple negotiation. You think you can barter with me using a little girl as your bargaining chip. You think promising to suddenly love her is going to erase the horrific fact that you plan to throw her away the very second she stopped being financially useful to your corporate image. You do not get to bargain with me." I leaned in slightly, making sure he could see the absolute frozen emptiness in my eyes. "You do not get to keep her. You do not get to keep anything. You do not get to keep the house. You do not get to keep the luxury cars, the company credit cards, or the comfortable, privileged life I built for you with my own two hands. You are standing at the absolute end of the line, and there is absolutely no redemption waiting for you here today." He tried to speak, to offer another pathetic excuse, but I immediately cut him off. "You abandoned a 7-year-old child in the middle of the night," I stated, enunciating every single word with lethal, unwavering precision. "You left her trapped in a dark closet while drug addicts tore apart your beautiful home. You stole her money to fund your own selfish vanity and feed your pathetic social media addiction. In the state of Texas, that is not just a bad parenting decision. That is felony child endangerment. That is financial fraud. That is criminal neglect. You belong in a cold prison cell, not in a luxury suburban estate. You broke the most sacred rule of family, and now you are going to pay the ultimate price for your actions." Derek stared up at me, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to hollow him out completely from the very inside. He opened his mouth to beg one last time to offer another useless apology, but before a single sound could escape his trembling lips, a deafening noise shattered the tense moment. The massive booming horn of the oasis of the seas blasted through the clear sky, a deep earth-shaking vibration that signaled the absolute end of the voyage. I looked past my weeping son, toward the distant shoreline growing larger and clearer on the horizon as the ship sailed forward. We were finally docking back in the busy port of Miami. And the Miami Police Department entirely agrees with me today, I added smoothly, turning my back on him forever. The massive oasis of the seas glided into the bustling port of Miami, its towering white hull casting a long, dark shadow over the concrete terminal. The morning air was already thick with Florida humidity, but I felt nothing but a chilling, resolute calm. Because I was traveling in the exclusive presidential suite, Maya and I were granted priority disembarkation. We were the very first passengers to walk down the long enclosed gangway, leaving the floating fortress behind us. Maya held my right hand, tightly swinging our arms gently back and forth, completely oblivious to the legal storm that had gathered at the bottom of the ramp. Waiting for us on the concrete pier was a formidable reception committee. There were 4 Miami Police Department officers standing next to 2 patrol cruisers, their emergency lights flashing red and blue against the terminal walls. Standing right beside the officers were 2 representatives from Child Protective Services holding clipboards and looking stern. I walked straight up to the lead detective. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," the detective said, extending his hand. "We received the expedited file from your attorney." I shook his hand firmly and reached into my suit pocket. I pulled out a small encrypted flash drive and placed it directly into the detective's palm. "Everything you need to secure a felony conviction is right there on that drive," I told him quietly. "You will find the high-definition security footage proving they left a 7-year-old child in the care of a teenager. You will also find a crystal-clear audio recording from last night. In that recording, my son confesses to embezzling $50,000 from a trust fund, and he outlines his plan to surrender an adopted child to the state simply because she no longer served his interests." The detective pocketed the flash drive and nodded grimly. "That is more than enough probable cause for an arrest," he confirmed. "We are going to wait right here until they come down that ramp." I stepped back, guiding Maya toward the safety of the CPS workers, who offered her a warm smile and a small coloring book to keep her distracted. We waited in the morning air for 45 minutes as the thousands of regular passengers began to filter off the ship. And then finally, I saw them. Derek and Brittany trudged down the gangway looking like shadows of their former selves. They were dragging their luggage behind them. Derek looked defeated, staring blankly at the floor panels, while Brittany walked with her head down, trying to hide her swollen, tear-stained face behind her sunglasses. Young Hunter walked quietly beside them, looking exhausted and confused by his parents' sudden, dramatic fall from grace. The very second Derek's foot touched the concrete pier, the lead detective stepped directly into his path. Derek Caldwell and Brittany Caldwell, the detective, announced his booming voice echoing across the crowded terminal. Hundreds of disembarking passengers immediately stopped in their tracks, turning their heads to watch the unfolding drama. Derek froze, his eyes darting frantically from the uniformed officers to the flashing lights of the patrol cars, and finally resting on me, standing quietly in the background. "You are both under arrest for felony child endangerment and grand larceny." The detective continued, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his utility belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your backs." Brittany let out a piercing, horrified shriek. "No, you cannot do this," she screamed, dropping her suitcase and violently pulling her arms away from an approaching female officer. "We are wealthy. We are important people. My father-in-law is just trying to punish us. It is a family dispute. Please do not touch me." The officers did not hesitate. They moved with practiced mechanical efficiency. The female officer grabbed Brittany by the wrists swiftly, twisting her arms behind her back and locking the metal cuffs securely into place with a sharp, undeniable click. Derek did not resist the officers at all. He simply turned around, placed his hands behind his back, and let the detective cuff him, tears streaming silently down his face. It was the ultimate cathartic payoff for every single lie they had told, every single dollar they had stolen, and every single tear they had forced my innocent granddaughter to cry. They were walked through the middle of the terminal, paraded in front of the very same wealthy passengers they had desperately tried to impress just 2 days ago. As they were being led away, the primary CPS caseworker stepped forward and gently knelt down in front of Hunter. The young boy was trembling, terrified by the sight of his parents being hauled away in steel chains. "It is okay, sweetie," the caseworker said softly. "You are going to stay with your grandpa for a little while, okay? He is going to take excellent care of you." The caseworker stood up and officially handed me the temporary emergency custody paperwork. I reached out and pulled Hunter into a tight, reassuring hug. I looked at Maya, who had walked over to hold her brother's hand. I had both of my grandchildren safe and sound, completely removed from the toxic, abusive environment their parents had created. I looked up just in time to watch the officers push Derek into the back of the first patrol cruiser. He hung his head in absolute shame, refusing to look at me one last time. Brittany, however, fought until the bitter end. As the female officer forced her down into the back seat of the second squad car, Brittany twisted her neck and locked her hateful eyes directly onto mine. "You ruined our lives, Rick," she screamed, her voice completely hoarse and unhinged, echoing off the terminal walls. "You ruined everything." The officer forcefully shoved her into the back of the police vehicle and slammed the heavy metal door completely shut instantly, cutting off her pathetic, venomous, and entirely pointless screams forever. The echo of that heavy metal door slamming shut marked the absolute end of their reign of terror and the beginning of our real lives. I stood on the pier, holding the hands of my 2 grandchildren, watching the patrol cars drive away until they were nothing but small specks in the bustling Miami traffic. I did not feel an ounce of regret. I felt like a surgeon who had successfully removed a toxic tumor from an otherwise healthy body. We boarded my private jet later that afternoon and flew back to the safety of Texas, leaving the pathetic wreckage of my ungrateful son and his wicked wife completely behind us to face the harsh consequences of their actions. Fast forward exactly 6 months, and the dust has finally settled. The legal battles were swift, brutal, and completely one-sided. My attorney, Michael Rossi, absolutely dismantled whatever pathetic defense their public defenders tried to assemble. Because I provided the police with irrefutable audio and video evidence of his terrible crimes, there was absolutely no need for a lengthy, traumatizing trial. He was far too cowardly to face a jury of his peers, so he immediately took a plea deal to avoid a much harsher sentence. He was formally convicted of felony child endangerment and corporate embezzlement. The judge, a stern woman who had zero tolerance for men who abandoned children, sentenced him to 5 years in a state penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He also lost the civil lawsuit I filed against him. Every single asset he ever possessed was seized to repay the $50,000 he stole from his daughter. He is currently sitting in a tiny concrete cell, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, completely stripped of his tailored suits and his expensive caviar. Brittany did not fare any better. The moment the handcuffs clicked onto her wrists, she turned completely against her husband. She filed for divorce while sitting in a holding cell, desperately trying to pin the entire criminal operation entirely on Derek. But the security footage of her verbal abuse, coupled with the financial paper trail, proved she was a fully willing accomplice. While she managed to avoid prison time by cooperating with the prosecutors, she was left absolutely destitute. She was evicted from the beautiful suburban estate I owned. Her luxury vehicles were instantly repossessed. Her wealthy socialite friends entirely abandoned her the second her mugshot hit the local news. Today, the woman who once refused to let a little girl ruin her pristine social media aesthetic is living in a rusted single-wide trailer on the dusty outskirts of town. She works the late-night shift at a greasy fast food restaurant, wearing a cheap polyester uniform, serving burgers to the same people she used to look down upon. She spends her days scrubbing greasy fryers and dealing with difficult customers who treat her with the exact same terrible disdain she once showed to my sweet, innocent adopted daughter. Justice truly has a profound and beautiful sense of irony. But the true victory in all of this terrible ordeal is not the absolute destruction of my enemies. It is the beautiful, unexpected resurrection of my real family. I officially fought for and won full legal custody of Hunter. The sudden transition was incredibly difficult and confusing for him at first. He had to unlearn years of toxic entitlement and narcissistic behavior that his parents had carefully ingrained into his young mind. But children are remarkably resilient. With proper guidance, patience, and a stable environment, he has blossomed into a kind, respectful young man who genuinely loves his sister. And Maya, my sweet, beautiful Maya, she has completely transformed. She no longer hides in dark closets or apologizes for her very existence. She runs through the massive halls of my estate with bright, uncontainable joy. She is thriving in her new school, making wonderful friends, and painting beautiful pictures that I proudly display all over my home. I completely restructured the family financial network. I officially renamed the primary holding accounts. They are now legally known as the Maya and Hunter Caldwell Legacy Trusts. Every single penny I possess is now securely locked away to guarantee their bright futures entirely untouchable by any greedy relatives or outsiders who might ever try to harm them again. Last week, we were all sitting together in the kitchen. Maya was eating breakfast, swinging her little legs happily under the granite table just like she did on that terrible morning 6 months ago. She looked up from her pancakes, her big brown eyes shining with absolute trust, and asked me if we could go to the park, but she did not call me Grandpa. She looked right at me and called me Dad. It was a simple, quiet moment, but it completely broke my heart in the most beautiful way possible. I smiled at her, holding back my tears, and told her we could go anywhere in the entire world. I spent decades building strong, impenetrable houses made of stone and steel, thinking I was creating a permanent legacy for my descendants to inherit and cherish for many generations. But I learned the hard way that a true legacy is not made of concrete, and a real family is certainly not determined by genetics alone. It took the ultimate betrayal to teach me the most valuable lesson of my entire life. I had to destroy my own son to save the innocent children he was supposed to protect. It was the hardest decision I have ever made in my life, but looking at their bright, smiling faces today, I know with absolute certainty that I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. Blood doesn't make you family. Love and loyalty do. Did I go too far, or did they get exactly what they deserved? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from. Subscribe for more.